The massive space station called Olympus Prime floated in the darkness between stars. Its metal walls stretched for miles in every direction, big enough to hold a small city. Bright lights covered its surface like glowing dots, and ships from dozens of different worlds docked at its many ports. Today was special. Today, the greatest athletes from across the galaxy had come here to compete. Jake Morrison walked through the crowded corridors, his work boots making soft sounds on the metal floor. He was 53 years old, with gray hair and deep lines around his eyes. A long scar ran down his left cheek, and his right leg was made of metal and plastic parts that clicked softly when he moved. Jake worked as a maintenance engineer on the station, fixing pipes and electrical systems. It was quiet work, and he liked it that way. The corridors buzzed with excitement. Aliens of every shape and size moved past him, their voices mixing together in a dozen different languages. Jake had seen many species during his 20 years working on the station, but tournament time always brought new faces. Some walked on two legs like humans, others floated through the air, and a few rolled along on wheels or slithered on their bellies. Jake reached the main observation deck just as the opening ceremony began. The arena below was huge, with seats for 50,000 spectators rising up in circles around a central stage. Holographic displays floated in the air, showing the ceremony to millions more viewers across the galaxy. Jake found a spot near the back where he could watch without getting in anyone's way. Music filled the air as the first group of athletes entered the arena. They were Zephyrians, beings that looked like they were made of living crystal. Their bodies were clear and sparkled, with inner light that shifted from blue to green to purple. They moved like dancers, their feet barely touching the ground. As Jake watched, some of them began to fade, becoming see-through like ghosts, then solid again. "The Zephyrians are showing their phasing ability," said a voice next to him. Jake turned to see Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the station's head medical officer. She was one of the few people Jake called a friend. "Phasing?" Jake asked. "They can shift between being solid and being energy. It's what makes them special. They think it makes them better than species that stay solid all the time." Elena's voice had a slight edge to it. She had never liked the way some aliens looked down on others. The Zephyrians finished their display and moved to one side of the arena. Next came the Octari, sea creatures with 8 long arms covered in suction cups. They moved in perfect coordination, their arms weaving together in complex patterns. Water rose from hidden jets in the floor, and they began to swim through the air as if it were an ocean. After the Octari came the Draconians, tall reptilian beings with scales that gleamed like metal. They breathed streams of controlled fire that painted pictures in the air. The crowd cheered as dragons and flowers made of flame danced above their heads. More groups followed. The insect-like hive minds moved as one, their movements perfectly synchronized. The plant-based Verdani swayed like trees in the wind, their leaves rustling with musical sounds. Each species showed off what made them unique, what made them proud. Jake watched it all with interest, but his attention kept drifting to the seating areas. He had learned during his military days to watch crowds as much as events. That was how he noticed the boy. The child sat alone in a section marked for disabled spectators. He was Zephyrian, but something was wrong with him. While the other Zephyrians in the arena sparkled with bright inner light, this boy's glow was weak and flickering. His crystal body seemed solid, unable to fade like the others of his kind. Jake studied the boy more closely. He looked to be about 12 years old in human terms, though Jake knew that aging worked differently for different species. The child's large eyes reflected the lights of the arena, but there was something sad in them. He sat very still, his hands folded in his lap, watching the ceremony with quiet attention. What struck Jake most was how alone the boy seemed. The disabled section had other spectators, but they were from different species. The Zephyrian seating Area was on the opposite side of the arena, and Jake could see the adults there deliberately looking away from the disabled section. They acted like the boy did not exist. The ceremony continued with speeches from officials and the lighting of a ceremonial flame, but Jake found his eyes returning to the lonely child again and again. There was something familiar about the way the boy held himself, the careful way he tried to take up as little space as possible. Jake had seen that posture before, in mirrors and in the faces of other veterans who had come home changed. The ceremony ended and the crowds began to leave. Jake stayed in his spot. He watched the boy stand up slowly and wait for the area around him to clear before moving. A tall, thin alien that Jake did not recognize approached the child. The alien wore the simple clothes of a care worker and spoke to the boy in gentle tones. The boy nodded and followed the care worker toward the exit. Jake finally left the observation deck and returned to his work. He had maintenance calls to finish before his shift ended. But as he worked, checking air filters and testing power systems, his mind kept returning to the image of the lonely Zephyrian boy. That evening, Jake sat in his small apartment and ate dinner alone, as he had every night for the past 5 years. His apartment was simple but clean, with a few pictures on the walls and a shelf full of technical manuals. He tried to read, but the words blurred together on the page. Instead, he found himself thinking about the boy again. Jake knew what it felt like to be different, to have others look at you and see only what was wrong. After the war, when he had first gotten his prosthetic leg, people had stared. Some had looked at him with pity, others with discomfort. A few had even looked at him with disgust, as if his injuries were somehow his fault. Jake had learned to live with being different. But it had taken years. He had been an adult when it happened, with military training and life experience to help him cope. But the Zephyrian boy was just a child, facing rejection from his own people. Jake turned on his computer and began to search the station's database for information about Zephyrians. He told himself he was just curious, that it had nothing to do with the boy. But as he read about their culture and their beliefs about physical perfection, he began to understand why the child had been sitting alone. The next morning, Jake reported for his shift as usual. He had a long list of maintenance tasks to complete, systems to check and repairs to make. But as he worked, he found himself taking routes through the station that passed by the areas where tournament spectators gathered. He told himself he was just being thorough, checking all the public areas for problems. But really, he was looking for the boy. Jake spent the next 3 days learning everything he could about Zephyrians. During his lunch breaks and after work, he sat in the station library reading files on his tablet. What he found made his chest feel tight with anger. Zephyrian society was built around something they called ethereal perfection. To them, the ability to phase between solid and energy forms was not just a physical skill, but a spiritual gift. They believed that beings who could only stay in solid form were trapped in base matter, unable to reach higher levels of existence. Children who could not phase were seen as cursed or broken. The condition had a name. Matterlock syndrome affected about 1 in every 10,000 Zephyrians. These children were born unable to shift between physical states. Their crystal bodies stayed solid, their inner light dim and weak. Most families who had such children gave them up to care facilities rather than face the shame of raising a defective child. Jake learned that the boy's name was Krell. He was 11 years old and had been abandoned by his parents when he was 3. Since then, he had lived in a government care center on the Zephyrian homeworld. The center had brought him to the tournament as part of a program to expose disabled children to other cultures, hoping it might help them understand that different species had different ideas about worth and value. Reading about Krell's life made Jake remember his own dark times. After losing his leg in the war, he had spent months in a hospital bed, staring at the ceiling and wondering if his life was over. He had felt worthless, broken, like damaged goods that nobody wanted. It took years of therapy and the support of other veterans to realize that losing a limb did not make him less human. But Krell was just a child, and he had no support system. No family, no friends, no one to tell him that he had value just as he was. Jake began to watch for Krell during his work shifts. The boy and his caregiver attended most of the tournament events, always sitting in the disabled section. Jake noticed that Krell paid attention to everything with intense focus. While other spectators cheered and shouted, Krell watched quietly, his large eyes taking in every detail. During the swimming competitions, Jake saw something that made him pause in his work. The Octory swimmers were performing incredible feats in the zero-gravity water spheres that floated above the arena floor. As they moved through the water, some of them noticed Krell in the disabled section. Instead of ignoring him like the other aliens did, they waved at him with their long arms. Krell's reaction was immediate and joyful. His dim inner light grew a little brighter, and he waved back with both hands. When the Octory performed a particularly difficult move, Krell clapped enthusiastically. The swimmers seemed to notice his appreciation and began directing some of their performance toward the disabled section. Jake found himself smiling as he watched this interaction. The Octory were known throughout the galaxy for their kindness and acceptance of others. Unlike many species that looked down on those who were different, the Octory judged people by their character rather than their abilities. After the swimming event ended, Jake followed Krell and his caregiver at a distance. He was not stalking them, he told himself. He was just curious about how they spent their time. The caregiver, whose name Jake learned was Ven, was from a species called the Narati. They were professional care providers, hired by various governments to look after beings who could not care for themselves. Ven seemed kind enough, but Jake could see that he viewed his job as exactly that, a job. He made sure Krell was fed and safe, but there was no warmth between them. Krell was just another assignment to him. Jake watched as they visited the tournament's technology displays. Here, Krell came alive in a way that surprised Jake. The boy studied every piece of equipment with intense interest. He asked Ven questions about how things worked, what made them function, why they were designed in certain ways. Ven did his best to answer, but it was clear that technology was not his area of knowledge. What struck Jake most was how quickly Krell understood complex systems. The boy looked at a gravity manipulation device and within minutes had figured out its basic operating principles. He studied a holographic projector and began explaining to Ven how the light patterns created three-dimensional images. This was not normal behavior for an 11-year-old of any species. Jake began to understand that Krell's interest in technology might be connected to his condition. Since he could not phase like other Zephyrians, he had turned his attention to the physical world around him. While his people dismissed solid matter as unimportant, Krell had learned to see its beauty and complexity. On the fourth day of the tournament, Jake made a decision. During his lunch break, he approached the disabled seating section. His heart was beating fast and his palms were sweaty. He had not been this nervous since his first combat mission. Krell was sitting alone, as usual. Ven had gone to get food, leaving the boy to watch the martial arts demonstrations by himself. Jake climbed the steps slowly, his prosthetic leg making soft clicking sounds. Several other disabled spectators looked at him with curiosity, wondering why a human maintenance worker was entering their section. Jake stopped a few feet away from Krell and cleared his throat. The boy looked up at him with those large, sad eyes. Up close, Jake could see that Krell's crystal skin was not perfectly clear like other Zephyrians. It had tiny flaws and cracks that made it look more like real gemstone than perfect glass. "Hello," Jake said, using the universal greeting that his translator would convert to any language. "My name is Jake. I work here on the station." Krell stared at him for a long moment. Jake could see fear in the boy's eyes. Most adults who approached Krell were either care workers with bad news or officials with forms to fill out. Nobody just came to talk to him. "Hello," Krell replied, his voice soft and musical like wind chimes. "I am Krell. Are you here to take me somewhere?" The question broke Jake's heart. This child was so used to being moved around, transferred from place to place, that he assumed any adult who spoke to him was there on official business. "No," Jake said, sitting down in the empty seat next to Krell. "I am not here to take you anywhere. I just wanted to talk to you." Krell looked confused. "Talk to me? Why?" Jake thought about how to answer that question. He could not say that he had been watching the boy for days, learning about his life and condition. He could not explain the connection he felt to another being who had been labeled as broken by his own people. "I noticed you watching the technology displays yesterday," Jake said instead. "You seemed to understand how everything worked. That is not easy to do." For the first time since Jake had been watching him, Krell's face showed real emotion. His dim inner light grew slightly brighter, and something that might have been pride flickered in his eyes. "I like to figure out how things work," Krell said. "The other children at the care center think it is boring, but I find it interesting. Physical matter has patterns and rules that make sense." Jake nodded. "I work with technology every day. I fix things when they break. It can be very satisfying." Work. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the martial arts demonstration below. A group of draconian fighters were showing off their combat skills, their movements precise and deadly. But Jake was not really watching the fight. He was thinking about the boy next to him and the plan that was beginning to form in his mind. "Krell," he said finally, "would you like to see how the station's systems work? I could show you the maintenance areas during my next break." Krell turned to look at him with wide eyes. "You would do that? Really? Really?" Jake said. "I think you might find it interesting." For the first time since Jake had seen him, Krell smiled. Jake met Krell at the maintenance entrance 2 hours later. Then had been suspicious at first when Jake explained his offer, but the caregiver was tired from days of following an 11-year-old around a massive space station. When Jake showed his official maintenance credentials and promised to keep Krell safe, Ven agreed to let them go. "Stay close to me," Jake told Krell as they entered the restricted areas behind the public spaces. "Some of these passages can be dangerous if you do not know where you are going." Krell nodded eagerly, his eyes wide with excitement. This was the first time since arriving at the tournament that anyone had treated him as anything other than a burden to be watched. The maintenance tunnels were a hidden world inside the station. Pipes and cables ran along the walls and ceiling, carrying power, water, air, and data to every part of Olympus Prime. The air hummed with the sound of machinery working constantly to keep 50,000 beings alive in the cold vacuum of space. Jake had spent 20 years learning these tunnels. He knew every junction, every access panel, every system that kept the station running. As they walked, he explained what different pipes and cables did, how the air recycling system worked, why certain areas needed extra power during tournament events. Krell absorbed every word like a sponge soaking up water. He asked questions that showed he understood not just what Jake was telling him, but how different systems connected to each other. When Jake showed him a junction where power cables split to feed different sections of the station, Krell immediately understood why the key load balancing was necessary. "You have a good mind for this," Jake said as they stopped at a viewing window that looked out into space. "Have you ever thought about becoming an engineer?" Krell's face fell. "Zephyrians do not become engineers. We are supposed to be artists, and philosophers and spiritual teachers. Working with physical matter is considered beneath us. What do you want to be?" Jake asked. The boy was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the stars. "I want to build things that help people. I want to make systems that work better, that are safer and more efficient." But no one would hire a Zephyrian engineer, especially one who cannot phase. Jake felt a familiar anger rising in his chest. It was the same anger he had felt when people told him he could not do certain jobs because of his prosthetic leg. The same anger that had driven him to prove them wrong. "Can I tell you something, Krell?" Jake said, sitting down on a maintenance crate so he was at the boy's eye level. 25 years ago, I was a soldier. I fought in a war on the edge of human space. During one battle, I was badly injured. I lost my right leg from the knee down. Krell looked down at Jake's prosthetic leg, which was clearly visible through his work pants. When I came home from the war, people looked at me differently. Some felt sorry for me. Others were uncomfortable around me. A few acted like I was broken, like losing a leg had somehow made me less human. For a while, I believed them. Jake rolled up his pants leg to show the connection between his flesh and the mechanical limb. Krell studied it with the same intense interest he showed all technology. "But I learned something important," Jake continued. "Being different does not mean being less. Sometimes it means being more. My prosthetic leg is stronger than a biological one. It does not get tired or injured. It has sensors that help me balance better than I could before. I am not broken. I am enhanced." Krell's inner light flickered brighter as he processed these words. "You think being unable to phase might not be a weakness?" "I think," Jake said, carefully, "that you see the physical world in ways that other Zephyrians cannot. While they dismiss solid matter as unimportant, you understand its beauty and complexity. That could be a great strength if you were in the right situation." They continued their tour of the maintenance areas. Jake showed Krell the central computer core, the atmospheric processing center, and the gravity generators that created artificial weight throughout the station. In each location, Krell proved that his understanding of technology was far beyond what anyone would expect from a child. In the computer core, Krell looked at the flowing patterns of data streams and immediately understood how information moved through the system. In the atmospheric center, he grasped the complex chemistry that kept the air breathable for dozens of different species. At the gravity generators, he asked questions about field harmonics that impressed even Jake. "How do you know so much?" Jake asked as they sat in the break room, sharing a meal. Krell looked embarrassed. "At the care center, I am not allowed to attend regular classes with normal Zephyrian children. Instead, I have to study alone using computer programs. The programs are designed to keep disabled children busy, but they have access to the full galactic educational database. I have been reading engineering and physics texts since I was 7 years old." Jake felt his anger returning. This brilliant child had been isolated and ignored while he taught himself subjects that most adults found difficult. How many other disabled children were wasting their potential because their societies had written them off as worthless? "Krell," Jake said, "what would you do if you could be anything you wanted? If no one could stop you or tell you that you were not good enough?" The boy's eyes lit up with an inner fire that Jake had not seen before. "I would design adaptive technology. Systems that help beings with disabilities do things they cannot do naturally. I would create devices that enhance people instead of trying to make them normal." Jake smiled. "That sounds like an excellent goal. But it is impossible," Krell said, his light dimming again. "No one would listen to ideas from someone like me." Jake was quiet for a moment, thinking. An idea was forming in his mind, something crazy and ambitious and probably impossible. But Jake had learned during his military career that impossible things sometimes just needed the right approach. "Krell," he said slowly, "what if I told you that tomorrow is the final day of the tournament? The day when they have exhibition matches and cultural demonstrations?" Krell nodded. "Then said we will watch the closing ceremonies and then leave. What if," Jake continued, "instead of just watching, you could show everyone what you can do? What if you could demonstrate that being different can be better than being normal? Krell stared at him with wide eyes. What do you mean? Jake leaned forward, his voice becoming more excited as the plan took shape in his mind. I mean, what if we built something together? Something that would show the entire galaxy that disabled does not mean unable? But we only have one night, Krell protested. And I do not have any materials or tools. Jake grinned, the expression making his scarred face look younger. Krell, you are talking to someone who has spent 20 years fixing everything on this station. I know where every spare part is stored, every tool that might be useful. And more importantly, I know how to work all night when something important needs to be done. Krell's inner light began to pulse with excitement. You would really help me build something? I would be honored to help you, Jake said. But first, I need to know exactly what you think you could do if you had the right equipment. Krell was quiet for a long moment, his mind clearly racing. When he spoke again, his voice was filled with wonder and possibility. I have been watching the Zephian athletes, he said. They can phase, but they can only exist in one state at a time, solid or energy, never both. But what if someone could exist in multiple states simultaneously? What if the inability to phase naturally could be turned into the ability to phase? In ways no natural Zephyrian ever could. Jake felt his pulse quicken. Go on. I think, Krell said, his voice growing stronger with each word. I know exactly what we need to build. Jake and Krell worked through the night in the deepest maintenance tunnels of Olympus Prime. Jake had gathered every spare part, tool, and piece of equipment he could find without triggering the automated inventory systems. Krell had sketched out his design on a piece of electronic paper, his hands moving quickly as he explained each component. The problem with natural phasing, Krell said as he connected two pieces of crystalline circuitry, is that Zephyrians can only exist in one state at a time. But my condition means I am always solid. If we can build a device that works with my natural biocrystalline matrix, I could exist in multiple states simultaneously. Jake welded two pieces of metal framework together, following Krell's precise measurements. How is that possible? Because I cannot phase naturally, my crystal structure is more stable than normal Zephyrians. It can handle the stress of multiple energy states without breaking apart. Normal Zephyrians would be torn apart if they tried to exist as both solid and energy at the same time. The device they were building looked like a combination of armor and art. The framework was made of lightweight alloys that Jake had salvaged from old repair drones. Krell had woven crystalline fibers throughout the structure, creating patterns that would resonate with his bioenergy. The whole system was controlled by a small computer that Krell had programmed with equations that made Jake's head spin. Where did you learn to do mathematics like this? Jake asked as he watched Krell input complex formulas. I taught myself, Krell said simply. When you cannot play with other children, you have a lot of time to study. As the hours passed, Jake found himself amazed by Krell's abilities. The boy understood engineering principles that Jake had taken years to master. More than that, Krell could see connections between different systems that Jake would never have noticed. The device they were building was not just advanced technology. It was genius. At 4 in the morning, Jake took a break to drink coffee and rest his aching back. Krell continued working, his small hands moving with precision as he calibrated the energy resonators. Krell, Jake said, are you sure this will work? The boy looked up from his work, his dim inner light pulsing with excitement. The mathematics are correct. The energy patterns should amplify my natural biocrystalline resonance by a factor of 12, but there's only one way to know for certain. What? If something goes wrong, what if the device hurts you? Krell was quiet for a moment. Jake, I have spent my whole life being told that I am broken, that I will never be able to do what other Zephyrians can do. If this device does not work, I will still be in the same situation I am in now. But if it does work, you could change everything, Jake finished. Not just for me. For every disabled being in the galaxy who has been told they are less than others. Jake nodded and returned to work. By 6 in the morning, the device was complete. It looked like an exoskeleton made of crystal and metal, designed to fit perfectly around Krell's small form. Sensors and resonators covered its surface, all connected to the central computer that would coordinate the multiple phase states. Now comes the dangerous part, Krell said as he began putting on the device. We have to test it. Jake helped him into the harness, checking each connection and making sure the fit was comfortable. The device was surprisingly light, but Jake could feel the power humming through its systems. How do you feel? Jake asked. Different, Krell said. I can sense the energy patterns around me in ways I never could before. It is like seeing colors that I did not know existed. Start slowly, Jake warned. Just try to activate one system at a time. Krell nodded and closed his eyes in concentration. Jake watched as the boy's dim inner light began to grow brighter. The crystalline parts of the device began to glow in response, creating patterns of light that flowed across its surface. Then something incredible happened. Krell began to change. His solid crystal form started to shimmer and fade, but instead of disappearing completely like a normal Zephyrian, he remained partially visible. He was existing as both solid and energy at the same time. It is working, Krell whispered, his voice filled with wonder. I can feel myself in multiple states. I am solid, but I am also energy, and something in between that has no name. Jake stared in amazement as Krell began to move. The boy floated a few inches off the ground, but his feet were still solid enough to push against the air. He reached out to touch a metal pipe, and his hand passed through it like it was made of smoke, then became solid again to grip it firmly. This is incredible, Jake said. You are doing things that no Zephyrian has ever done. Krell experimented with his new abilities for several minutes, learning to control the different phase states. He could become completely solid for strength and stability, shift to pure energy for speed and mobility, or exist in the in-between states that gave him capabilities that defied normal physics. We need to go, Jake said, checking his watch. The final ceremony starts in 2 hours. If we are going to do this, we need to get to the arena. They packed up their tools and cleaned the workspace, leaving no trace of what they had accomplished. Krell wore a maintenance coverall over the device to hide it from casual observation. To anyone who looked, he appeared to be just another disabled child being escorted by a station worker. The arena was already filling with spectators when they arrived. Jake used his maintenance credentials to access the service areas beneath the main floor. From there, they could reach the arena itself without going through security checkpoints. Are you ready for this? Jake asked as they waited in the shadows beneath the arena floor. Krell was nervous but determined. I have been ready my whole life. I just did not know it until now. The final ceremonies had begun above them. Jake could hear the announcer's voice echoing through the arena as various species gave their farewell presentations. Soon it would be over, and all the beings would return to their home worlds, carrying the same prejudices and limitations they had arrived with, unless Jake and Krell could change that. Remember, Jake said, we are not trying to prove that you are as good as other Zephyrians. We are trying to show that being different can be better. Krell nodded, his inner light growing brighter with determination. I understand. Jake accessed the arena floor controls through his maintenance tablet. In 30 seconds, the floor panel directly beneath the center of the arena would open, allowing them to emerge in full view of 50,000 spectators and millions more watching across the galaxy. 30 seconds, Jake said. Krell activated his device, and immediately the air around them began to shimmer with energy. He rose off the ground, existing simultaneously in multiple phase states, ready to show the universe something it had never seen before. 20 seconds. Jake felt his heart pounding. He was about to risk his career, his reputation, and possibly his life for a disabled alien child he had met only days before. But he had never been more certain of anything in his life. 10 seconds. Krell looked at him with eyes that glowed like stars. Thank you, Jake, for everything. 5 seconds. Jake smiled and placed his hand on the floor panel release. Ready. Ready. The panel opened, and they rose into the light of the arena, ready to change the galaxy forever. Silence fell over the arena like a heavy blanket. 50,000 beings stopped talking, stopped moving, stopped breathing as Jake and Krell rose through the floor panel into the bright lights of the central stage. The arena had been designed for dramatic moments, but nothing like this had ever happened before. Jake walked slowly across the arena floor, his prosthetic leg clicking softly on the polished surface. Behind him, Krell floated 3 feet off the ground, his crystal form shimmering between solid and energy states. The device they had built together hummed with power, creating patterns of light that flowed across Krell's body like living art. The tournament officials in their booth looked confused and alarmed. Security guards started moving toward the arena floor, but they stopped when they saw Jake's maintenance credentials displayed on the large screens around the arena. Technically, he had the right to be there, even if this was not exactly normal maintenance work. Jake reached the center of the arena and turned to face the crowd. His voice, amplified by the arena's sound system, carried to every corner of the massive space. "My name is Jake Morrison," he said. "I am a maintenance engineer on this station, and a veteran of the Centauri border wars. 25 years ago, I lost my leg in combat. For a long time, I thought that made me broken, useless, less than other humans." The crowd remained silent, unsure what to make of this interruption to their carefully planned ceremony. 4 days ago, I met someone who changed my understanding of what it means to be different. Jake gestured to Krell, who was still floating behind him, his form shifting between states like a living rainbow. "This is Krell. He's 11 years old, and he has been abandoned by his people because he cannot do what other Zephyrians can do." In the Zephyrian seating section, Jake could see adults shifting uncomfortably in their seats. They had not expected their shame to be displayed in front of the entire galaxy. "But Krell is not broken," Jake continued. "He is brilliant. While his people dismissed him as defective, he taught himself engineering and physics that most adults cannot understand. While they saw only what he could not do, he learned to see possibilities they never imagined." Jake stepped aside, giving Krell the center of the arena. The boy took a deep breath and began to demonstrate his new abilities. First, Krell became completely solid, his crystal form dense and strong. He picked up a heavy piece of arena equipment that would normally require 3 adults to move, lifting it over his head with ease. The crowd murmured in surprise. Even the strongest Zephyrians could not match that level of physical power. Then Krell shifted to pure energy, his body becoming a flowing pattern of light that moved around the arena faster than the eye could follow. He raced up the walls and across the ceiling, leaving trails of sparkling energy in his wake. Normal Zephyrians could move quickly in energy form, but nothing like this. But the real magic happened when Krell began to exist in multiple states simultaneously. His body became a shifting, flowing work of art that was solid, energy, and something completely new all at the same time. He could touch physical objects while also passing through them. He could be in 2 places at once, his form stretching and dividing before coming back together. The arena erupted in amazed gasps and shouts. Beings who had lived for centuries and thought they had seen everything stared in wonder at the impossible sight before them. Krell was not just matching what normal Zephyrians could do. He was surpassing them in ways they had never dreamed possible. In the VIP section, the Zephyrian delegation sat in stunned silence. Their carefully constructed beliefs about perfection and spiritual superiority were crumbling before their eyes. The child they had dismissed as worthless was performing feats that made their greatest athletes look ordinary. Krell continued his demonstration, showing more and more of what his unique abilities could do. He created solid energy constructs that glowed with inner light. He became a living bridge between the physical and spiritual worlds that Zephyrians claimed to value so highly. He was everything they aspired to be, but had never achieved. When Krell finally settled back to the arena floor, the silence returned. Then, from the disabled seating section, came the sound of clapping. One being, then another, then dozens began to applaud. The sound spread throughout the arena like wildfire until 50,000 voices were cheering as one. But the real change came from the other species delegations. The Draconian ambassador stood up in his box and began speaking rapidly into his communication device. The Octory delegation was already planning how to implement adaptive technology programs for their own disabled citizens. Representatives from dozens of worlds were realizing that they might have been wasting the potential of their own people. Jake stepped forward again, his voice carrying over the noise of the crowd. Krell built this device himself, using knowledge that he learned because he was given time to study instead of time to play. His condition, which his people saw as a curse, gave him abilities that no normal Zephyrian will ever possess. He is not broken. He is not less than others. He is extraordinary in ways that only become possible when we stop trying to make people normal and start helping them become themselves. The cheering grew louder. In the disabled section, beings who had spent their lives being told they were worthless were standing and applauding a child who had just proven that different could mean better. Jake looked at Krell, who was glowing brighter than he ever had before. The boy's eyes were filled with tears of joy, but also something else: confidence, pride, the knowledge that he had value not despite his differences, but because of them. As the cheering continued, Jake began to see the changes that would ripple out from this moment. The Draconian Empire would establish the first adaptive technology research center within 6 months. The Octory would create new categories in there: athletic competitions for beings with different abilities. The Zephyrian government would face pressure to change their laws about disabled children. Most importantly, disabled beings across the galaxy would hear about what happened today. They would learn that being different did not mean being less. Some would become engineers like Krell. Others would find their own unique talents and abilities. All of them would know that they had worth and potential that the universe needed. 3 years later, Jake stood in the same arena during the opening ceremonies of the next Galactic Tournament. But this time, he was not alone in the maintenance tunnels. He was in the VIP section as the guest of honor, watching as the first ever adaptive athletics division began their competitions. Krell, now 14 and studying advanced engineering at the Galactic Technical Institute, served as both competitor and mentor to the other adaptive athletes. His original device had been refined and improved, and similar technology now helped beings with various disabilities achieve things their species had never thought possible. Jake watched with pride as a young Draconian with damaged fire glands used mechanical enhancement to create flame sculptures more beautiful than any natural fire breather could manage. A Octory with only 4 arms used adaptive technology to coordinate 12 mechanical limbs in a swimming routine that redefined grace and beauty. The universe had learned what Jake and Krell discovered in those maintenance tunnels. Being different was not a problem to be solved. It was a gift to be celebrated, a source of innovation and wonder that made everyone stronger. As Jake applauded the athletes below, he felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Krell, his crystal form now bright and confident, his inner light shining like a star. "Thank you," Krell said simply, "for seeing what others could not." Jake smiled, remembering a lonely boy sitting by himself in the disabled section, and a broken veteran who thought his best days were behind him. Both of them had been wrong about what the future could hold. "Thank you," Jake replied, "for showing me that broken things can become beautiful when someone believes in them." Together, they watched as the galaxy celebrated not what beings could not do, but what became possible when different was finally understood to mean extraordinary.